Let's begin the summit. Everyone, please welcome Doug Carlson.
Good morning, everybody. Well, my name is Doug Carlson, and I am the Chief Executive Officer for NUCA. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to NUCA's first ever virtual Washington Summit. We have a lot planned for you today, so let's get started. The pandemic over the past 6 months has made us try new approaches to advocacy. While our method in past summits was to direct the NUCA membership to conduct face-to-face meetings with lawmakers and their staff, this year that was clearly not possible, as you all know. Instead, we have done a lot of planning to host our Washington Summit virtually with modern technology. This is new for all of us, but I'm confident we will have a great day with amazing results. First, I would like to thank our national partners for sponsoring the 2020 Washington Summit. I know they all want to be in person with you to visit and chat, but we thank them for the generosity and continued support of the association. And this event would not be possible without their support. So thank you very much. So now for an overview of today's summit activities. First up, obviously, is this opening session with our keynote speakers and legislative briefing from our legislative team. And this should last about an hour. Throughout the day, then, our chapters have arranged virtual one-on-one meetings with our lawmakers, and they have sent you the schedule and information to log on to those specific meetings. If you do not have that information, please feel free to contact your local chapter, or you can also go to www.wedigamerica.org, and the latest list of meetings is also posted there. You can also please feel free to call our national office, and we'll have that phone number at the very end. These are important meetings for the industry and your business, even if they are conducted virtually. Each of you is an ambassador to Congress of our crucial industry, and your experiences and thoughts on our issues are very important. Lawmakers depend on industry experts to share real-world effects of legislation, both good and bad. So what's ahead? Our goals for the summit are straightforward. We want to show the importance of the utility construction industry to our elected officials. We must express the need to build and repair our community's water, wastewater, gas, electric, broadband, and pipeline infrastructure. Each of these projects can contribute to our nation's economic recovery from the pandemic. And each of these can provide economic relief for their local communities. But to meet America's great need, Congress must approve the funding necessary for these projects. Our top 3 projects: infrastructure funding, water, wastewater, electric, natural gas. Nobody wants another Flint, Michigan, so Congress needs to act. Broadband, which is critical to future development and innovation in America. And pipeline safety, the continual need for improved regulations and damage prevention. We would also like to encourage our lawmakers to support the 1-year extension of the existing surface transportation law called the FAST Act, which faces its expiration date next week. This was passed last night out of the House and sent over to the Senate, and hopefully they will act quickly. The feedback we have received from members of Congress in prior in-person summit visits to offices has always been positive. They learn from your discussions and your personal stories about your businesses and communities. You are the industry experts, and they depend on you to let them know what needs to be done so that our industry can make these vital improvements. At the end of the day, we will meet back here virtually at 5 p.m. Eastern using this exact same link that you used to log on today to wrap up the day. We want to hear back from you what stories you shared, what feedback you had from your legislators, and any important information you gleaned from them. So lastly, just some housekeeping items. WebEx is similar to other programs such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams. There are a couple of buttons in the lower right-hand side of your screen titled Participants and Chat. Clicking on Participants gives you a list of summit attendees. But then also, to ask a question, you can submit a written question at any time using the chat feature. We will go through those questions at the conclusion of the legislative presentation. It is now my pleasure to introduce our chairman of the board, Mr. Fred Chesney, with Centerline Utilities.
Good morning and welcome to NUCA's first ever virtual Washington Summit. The national response to the coronavirus pandemic has affected all of our lives since spring. Capitol Hill remains closed to the public, but in an election year, it's more important than ever before to try new ideas to deliver our vitally important message to our elected lawmakers in Congress. I'm glad you've decided to be part of that advocacy because Congress needs to hear from us. You're the nation's infrastructure experts. Every day on job sites throughout the country, you're building and updating vital systems necessary for the health of our nation. You know precisely what kind of improvements are needed in your community and exactly how much these projects cost in direct resources and labor requirements. We've got several important pieces of infrastructure legislation awaiting action in Congress today. Passing these bills is critical to our industry, our employees, and our communities. NUCA's Washington Summit has always been the most effective method to bring together our industry experts and your elected officials. Later today, instead of traveling to Washington and visiting lawmakers' offices on Capitol Hill, we are going to do it virtually via our computers. Today's virtual Washington Summit is an experiment. Like many other events we've attended this year, our summit changed by necessity because of the pandemic. I know this industry likes a challenge, and I know today's summit will be a success. NUCA and our chapters have set up meetings with legislators and their staffs. Our job today is to tell the story of our industry, our communities, and what resources we need to improve and renew our aging yet vital systems. From water, electric, and gas to broadband, there's a lot of work to do. If you've traveled to Washington before, you know the importance of these meetings with your members of Congress. Doing it today via your computer is no less important. We've got about an hour ahead to listen to NUCA's government affairs experts discuss today's online meetings. We'll also hear from several members of Congress discuss the importance of infrastructure. Your chapters have sent a schedule of your meetings today. These are important to the industry, so please be back online at those times to participate. Your lawmakers need to hear from you. Any success we achieve today is in no small part due to the generous support of NUCA's many national partners. We could not have done these advocacy programs in place for you and industry without their resources, their personnel, and their presence. Thank you, NUCA national partners. And thank you for your time and help today. This summit could not happen without you, and we are grateful for your time and support.
Thank you for your leadership, Fred. We greatly appreciate your time and effort and energy you've put into this association. Our first virtual speaker is Representative Bruce Westerman, representing the 4th District of Arkansas. Congressman Westerman serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and has been a consistent friend of the construction industry in Congress. He is the ranking member on the Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee, which sees a lot of our legislation. He graduated from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville with a degree in engineering and played on the Razorbacks football team. His education includes a master's in forestry from Yale University. Before coming to Congress in 2015, he served in the State House, serving as Majority Leader for 2 years. Congressman Westerman is the only certified forester serving today in the U.S. House. Please welcome Congressman Westerman.
Greetings, I'm Congressman Bruce Westerman from Arkansas's 4th Congressional District. I want to welcome everyone to the summit. Too bad we can't be in person doing this in live interaction, but this electronic technology is the best thing that we've got going right now. So again, welcome to the Utility Contractors Association. I want to thank you all for the great job that you do. I want to recognize your efforts during the pandemic. You know, a lot of people can't work remotely, and people doing construction work, doing utility work, those are areas where your job requires you to be there in person. And I know a lot of folks in your area got out and worked through the pandemic, and they're still growing strong. And we depend on you, and we thank you for that. As we look at things that Congress is considering and how it affects your industry, I think of a few areas. The first one's water resources, and I say that because I'm the ranking member on the Water and Environment Subcommittee on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and we just passed the water bill out of committee and off of the House floor unanimously, which means we had a good coming together on something that should never be partisan on infrastructure, and we were able to get agreement on some very good wins for water infrastructure. We're going to be able to use the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund to actually do maintenance on harbors. We're going to be able to use the Inland Waterways Trust Fund to improve our inland waterways. We got some cost reimbursement for doing things like repairing levees. And as I look specifically in my district, the work on the Arkansas River, the work on the Ouachita River, there's all some very good stuff in Word. I just hope the Senate will be able to take it up, pass the bill, and the president sign it into law. Some other areas that are very critical and they've been highlighted during the pandemic are the access to rural broadband. I'll be back in Arkansas tomorrow with Senator Bozeman. We'll be announcing a project where through USDA, a $130 million project to deploy rural broadband in the Arkansas River Valley in my district. As more students are working from home, taking classes online, as people are working remotely, we've seen the dramatic need for high-speed broadband in all parts of the country. So this is exciting news. I think we're going to see more and more broadband development. Some of the policies we put in the 2018 Farm Bill are helping to fund this. That's actually what's funding the project in my district. But also through the CARES Act, I know the state of Arkansas has $100 million set aside for rural broadband. But we've got to give them some flexibility here in Congress, and I'm working hard to make sure that happens. Another thing, when you talk about construction, and we look at our federal lands, we passed the Great American Outdoors Act, which is going to put money out there to do work on our national parks, on our U.S. Forest Service, to repair and fix infrastructure and to build new infrastructure. So some exciting things happening. You all are in a great industry. Again, thank you for letting me be a part of your summit, and I wish you the best and Godspeed.
Well, thank you, Congressman. He makes some very good points in his presentation that you can also use in your own meetings. If you're meeting with your senators, please remind them that the Water Resources Development Act passed by the House, H.R. 7575, is awaiting Senate action and needs vital approval. That bill reauthorizes the WRDA and it provides about $8.6 billion in water infrastructure funding. In your meetings, if you know a lawmaker that also voted to pass legislation that we supported, please thank them for that vote, as the congressman supported the Great American Outdoors Act that he mentioned. He voted for that bill, which was signed into law on August 4th by President Trump. Everyone included members of Congress look for the praise in their actions. And when they help us with their vote, a simple thank you can go a long way. So make sure you congratulate them and thank them for their efforts. Many of you are active on social media. And so we want to take a quick moment to send an important message to our leaders in Washington to let them know that the utility construction industry is on Capitol Hill today, virtually, emphasizing the importance of our nation's infrastructure. Without us, clean water would not exist in their homes and offices. It's called a tweet storm. And if all of us with a Twitter account can send them our message at the same time, they will definitely take notice. Social media can be a very effective advocacy tool. So here's the message we would like to send to the President, Senator McConnell, and Senator Pelosi. And if you have your phone handy there, or you can access your account, or maybe even after this presentation, make sure you tweet this out. To invest in pound infrastructure to build America's recovery. Pound We Dig America, pound NUCA Summit, at Real Donald Trump, at Senate Majority Leader, at Speaker Pelosi. So please log in to your mobile device or your account and tweet this message before we hear from our next congressional speaker. And make sure you use the hashtag. You can also retweet our message that we just sent out earlier today. So let's just take a pause for a minute or so to allow people to have time to do that. This is very, very important.
And Doug, this is Eben Wyman. That is very well said. And just let them know we can pay now or we can pay a whole lot later.
And while people are doing that, I would also encourage them to follow my Twitter account at NUCA CEO.
And Doug as well too. This is Robert Baylor, Director of Communications. I just tweeted it out. So let the tweet storm begin. You can go to NUCA_national and retweet ours as well too.
I know we've kind of surprised everybody with that announcement, but hopefully everybody will do that. We'll give them one more minute to do that.
I already see one person retweeted my message.
I think that was me, Bob.
No, was it? Oh, good. Team.
Well, Doug, the fact that we have 103 folks on this webinar, I think that we have a lot of potential to make a difference today. So I think your thoughts are spot on.
Great. I see Matt Mingus just retweeted that. I'll retweet yours, Matt. Thank you very much. Nebraska. Kara Haybrock. Awesome. NUCA, Colorado.
We know Kara's going to do that. I mean, Kara's like, she's a pillar of this association. So well done.
Wesley Hilton, Kelly Coomer. So thank you very much for that as that's going out. So we'll continue on with our program. And again, if you did not have time to do that quickly, we're going to actually post that slide is actually posted on WeDigAmerica.com. So you can actually go and reread that. And we'll also be posting this entire presentation as soon as it becomes available. So we'll continue to move on. So thank you for sending that important message. Finally, I'd like to introduce our final virtual representative, Congressman Sam Graves, who serves as the ranking Republican member on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He attended college at the University of Missouri in Columbia, receiving a degree in agriculture. He served in the Missouri legislature in the 1990s before being elected to Congress in 2001. Congressman Graves represents the 6th District of Missouri and is now serving in his 10th term in Congress. As a ranking member, Sam leads the Republicans on the committee as it has jurisdiction over all modes of transportation: highways and bridges, transit and rail, pipelines, and maritime transportation. 10 terms as Congress is a very long time to show a strong commitment to the goals of the American construction industry, and we are grateful he could speak to our members today. Please welcome Congressman Sam Graves.
Hi, I'm Sam Graves of Missouri, the ranking member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on our committee's priorities for the rest of the year. First, it's critical that Congress passes a surface transportation extension before the current bill expires at the end of this month. We're working to send a united message to leadership in both chambers that stakeholders like you need the stability extension at least the next year. We must ensure that states can plan and carry out projects during the 2021 construction season. That's absolutely critical for job creation. In these times of COVID, we don't need the additional uncertainty that comes with a short-term extension. We also need to provide stability and solvency for the Highway Trust Fund, which has been negatively impacted by the recent decrease in travel. We will continue working with the states to help them meet their infrastructure needs in the coming months. Unfortunately, a bipartisan long-term surface bill never materialized this Congress, so we need to get back to work to do that as soon as possible. As we do that, committee Republicans will continue pushing our priorities that we introduced in our 5-year highway bill called the Starter Act, including streamlining the project review process, providing states with more flexibility, and focusing on core infrastructure programs. Our committee is also working to finish a bipartisan Water Resources Development Act, or the WRDA bill. We're making progress with the Senate, and we hope to send a bill to the President before the end of the year. It's been a year since the expiration of the last pipeline safety authorization, and we need to make it a priority to pass a new law. The Senate has passed a bipartisan bill, and committee Republicans are eager to do the same. Pipeline safety shouldn't be a partisan issue, and there's no reason Congress shouldn't work across the aisle to get this done. Finally, I want to commend you for your support for investments in wastewater infrastructure. We need to continue supporting these investments and reduce the regulatory burdens that make it particularly difficult for small and rural communities to improve aging water systems. This is an issue that's still in play as WRDA discussions continue. And I urge you to highlight the need to authorize these various infrastructure programs as you meet with members of Congress this week. Thank you, and I look forward to working with you and continuing to work with you.
Well, thank you, Congressman Graves. I know the Kansas City delegation just met with him a couple of weeks ago, and they're working closely with him. You know, he makes some very good points about the 1-year extension to the surface transportation bill supported by NUCA. In your meetings, remind your lawmakers that this 1-year extension will give stability to our industry's 2021 project timelines. A shorter extension will only deliver instability in projects. We would like to have had that by September 30th, a full reauthorization of the FAST Act. But as I had already mentioned before, the House passed it last night, and we need to get that for a 1-year extension. We need to get that approved by the Senate. So thank you to all of our congressmen who spoke to us. Those virtual briefings are important for our congressional allies on the legislative environment in Congress. But now we'd like to hear from NUCA's congressional experts, Mr. Eben Wyman and Mr. Zach Perconte. Eben and Zach are the link between our association and Congress as our governmental affairs lobbyists, representing this association on Capitol Hill and in our federal regulatory agencies. Eben joined NUCA as our contract lobbyist in 2019, bringing more than 30 years of experience to underground policy discussions at all levels of government. Eben also has a broad range of legislative and regulatory matters, including expansion of the national infrastructure markets, labor issues, pipeline safety, and underground damage prevention issues. Again, if you have questions for Eben or Zach during the presentation, please send using the chat feature. And at the end of each topic session, a NUCA staff member will engage our speakers addressing your questions. Please welcome Eben Wyman and Zach Perconte.
Well, thank you, Doug. Appreciate that. And I really appreciate the fact that we have over 100 NUCA folks participating in this virtual flying. I can't tell you. It would be easy to say, let's just keep our eye on our own company. But what you're doing for this association today is fundamental and imperative and critical, and I can't thank you enough. Getting into what to expect today for those of you that have not participated in NUCA fly-ins before, expect about 20 to 30 minutes with staff or the lawmaker. I can't tell you how important it is enough to personalize this, to make it sure that if you're from Indiana, you talk about the importance to Indiana. Personalize this stuff. Make the most of these visits. We have lots of leave behind material that I know that the chapters and all of you are going to forward. Lots of correspondence, letters, talking points. All the information that they need to know is in there, but make your point personal, if you will. Make it about the area that you're coming from. I can't tell you again the importance of following up and saying just thanks for the visit. And I want to give it to Zach. I want to pass it on to Zach to talk about industry allies and the importance of infrastructure investment. And then I'll take it from there. So Zach, take it away.
Thanks so much, Evan. If we could jump ahead a couple slides. Perfect. So investment in infrastructure is our bread and butter, right? We all know that well-functioning infrastructure is indispensable to the health of our country. And we all know that, quite frankly, what we have right now just isn't cutting it. If you want to use the latest EPA estimates, the United States has about a $500 billion investment gap in what is needed to maintain and replace not only our wastewater and stormwater treatment systems, but our drinking water as well. As Doug mentioned earlier today, nobody wants another Flint, Michigan. Well, our country has a gap of $473 billion needed to improve America's drinking water infrastructure, which is a figure that will definitely raise a lot of eyebrows on the Hill. What's more than that is federal spending last year accounted to just 4% of all spending on that wastewater utility infrastructure. So there is a lot of work that our government could be doing for us that isn't. Sorry, just a second, folks. So when it comes to that investment, there are a few different ways that the federal government can make up the gap. The primary investment mechanism that we're looking at right now are the state revolving funds, of which there are two, the Clean Water SRF and the Drinking Water SRF. The main piece of legislation we're looking at for the former of those is H.R. 1497, which is the Water Quality Protection and Job Creation Act. Now, the thing about those state revolving funds is they have not been reauthorized since they were created in the 1980s. Ever since the initial creation of those funds, all of the money that's been allocated to them has been done through the appropriations process. So as a result of that, there is no steady set expectation for how much money is going into those funds. That means that there's a lot of uncertainty, and we all know in our industry that uncertainty is not good for long-term projects. So that bill, we were very encouraged by the fact that it was a bipartisan bill passed out of committee, but it hasn't gone anywhere since then. What we're really pushing for is for that to be considered by the Senate, to be considered by the full House. 14 billion is a great number. We'd like to see more, but that is a good starting point. In addition, if we're moving over to the Senate side, there are two major water packages that were also introduced earlier this year. These bills were in progress before the coronavirus pandemic hit. They're not COVID response bills, but the Senate kind of took them and turned them into COVID response bills, if that makes any sense. So those two bills are the America's Water Infrastructure Act, which would add $7.5 billion over 3 years to reauthorize that Clean Water SRF. and also includes several of the provisions of the bill that Congressman Graves mentioned earlier, the Water Resources Development Act. That is essentially the Senate counterpart to the bill that the House just passed. It's not exactly the same, but we are still supporting it because it is important that that word of bill get passed. The other bill in that two-bill package is the Drinking Water Infrastructure Act, DWIA. That reauthorizes the Safe Drinking Water Act and includes about $300 million in grants to assist in the remediation of drinking water contamination and remove PFAS and other forever chemicals from our nation's water supply. So both two very important bills, both of which supported by NUCA. We'd like to see more SRF funding in them, but the bills are definitely a step in the right direction. However, what's probably the most important bill that I'm mentioning here is also, unfortunately, probably the one that stands the least chance of passage in this Congress as it stands. And that is H.R. 2, the Moving Forward Act. Now, H.R. 2 is one of the bills coming out of the House of Representatives that is less intended for passage and, quite frankly, more intended as sending a message as where the House majority stands on infrastructure issues.
That's right.
There are a lot of things in that bill that, frankly, we don't like. But there are also a lot of things in that bill that we are big fans of. So NUCA in July sent in a letter supporting 7 specific sections of that bill, 2 of which were, 1, it included $476 billion in highway funding, which we like to see. But most importantly, it includes a lift on the cap of private activity bonds for water and wastewater projects. Removing the PAB state volume cap would increase the amount of available state investment, state volume cap, increase the amount of private investment and capital investment dramatically. It would essentially turn on the spigot of funding for these water projects, would enable more public-private partnerships and decrease the risk placed on local governments. These are fantastic funding initiatives that essentially take all of the risk out of the government's hands while maintaining government ownership of the final product. Fantastic way to get a lot more money into water and wastewater projects. They've lifted the cap on PABs for other infrastructure areas in the past, and water and wastewater, we just haven't been able to get that lifted yet. What's particularly noteworthy about this bill is in the past, we've actually had Republican support on this issue, but we have not been able to get the Democrats on board. So it's very encouraging that the Democrats included this in their legislation. While we don't support the entirety of H.R. 2, this getting done would be a huge, huge, huge win for NUCA. So if you're going to talk about H.R. 2, and I strongly encourage you to, just hammer home that lifting the cap on private activity bonds would be one of the single most important steps that Congress could take to restore our nation's water and wastewater infrastructure. So
Jack, I can't, that's spot on. And the beautiful thing about lifting the cap on water and wastewater is it takes not just the cost, but the long-term debt off the muni and gives it to the private partner, and a very willing private partner. And I think the default on water and sewer projects is like 0.002. So whoever invests is completely interested in investing it. So this should be a private sector issue, a Republican issue. And the fact that we have Democrats putting it in a coronavirus recovery bill is nothing but encouraging. And so even if it's not in play, which it probably is not, we should be talking about it. Does that make sense, Zach?
Absolutely. Like I said, I just can't repeat enough just how encouraging the fact that this provision was included in that bill is. Getting the state volume cap lifted on those private activity bonds really would be a game changer for our industry.
I think that's exactly right. And Bob, I'm not sure if you can just unmute Dan Buckley, but he speaks to this really well, and does so on the issue briefing on investment infrastructure.
If Dan is with us, please unmute yourself. You have the ability to do that. If not, you can certainly go to our excellent video page, NUCA.com/summit-docs, and there's a nice presentation done between you, Dan, and some of the others on this particular subject.
In the meantime, I am happy to take any questions on this.
Hey, I got a question for you. This is Don Taylor with Corn, Maine.
Go on, Don.
I guess I've been part of this for several years, and I've heard much about the cap on private activity bonds, which would be a game changer. Can you explain exactly why this hasn't gotten any traction, or why it's stuck, or why there's opposition to it? I'd just like to know, what is it that some of the legislators don't like about this idea to fund water and lift the activity bond cap for water, wastewater projects, while they have done it for other infrastructure projects?
It's a great question, and I think the quick answer is the word private. The Democrats generally don't like the word private because they think that we're trying to privatize utilities. At the same time, there are conservative Republicans that don't want to see anything without a pay for, even if it's you're talking about, tax revenue. I think it's too much of a small thing that would do so much for water and wastewater.
Yeah, I would say that I would agree with Evan. I think that the main issue, quite frankly, is largely been a misconception on the part of certain lawmakers, and I'm not going to name any names, that because that word private is in there, that, well, this means we're privatizing water and wastewater infrastructure, and nobody wants to, have their drinking water line owned by a private company, right? That would be unthinkable. Right. But that's not what's happening. It's not, we're not putting in privately owned water projects when we're lifting the cap on these private activity bonds. That's not what's happening. What it's doing is creating a public-private partnership wherein a lot of the funding and the risk are outsourced, but it provides yet another way to get that outside investment into these projects. And like Evan said, the rate of default on these projects is less than 1%. So for outside money, this is a very safe, reliable investment. You're pretty much guaranteed to get a good return on it. But it provides a way to get that funding that just isn't coming from the federal government. Like I said earlier, only about 4% of federal spending has happened on wastewater infrastructure. There's a lot more money out there that would be getting into the game if that cap was lifted, but really the fear has been that we're privatizing infrastructure, and that's just not what's happening. So, I mean, I think that largely things are starting to change, in part because of efforts like ours, where we're educating the lawmakers and telling them what's really happening with this, and don't be afraid of the word private, because all it's really doing is just providing a mechanism for outside investment.
I think that's exactly right.
So, though, isn't the default rate on these so low because there's effectively very little possibility of defaulting? What effectively happens is if a utility gets behind on one of these, they just keep jacking up the rates on the ratepayers, and to pay back the private activity bonds. So isn't there a little bit of, yeah, they don't default, but that's because they can't default. They have to keep jacking up rates on ratepayers to pay back whatever that it is they owe. So does raising this cap put utilities in a position where they borrow more than they should because the lenders don't care? They'll get their money one way or another, but they get in trouble, and then the ratepayers are suddenly forced to pay inordinately high rates for a necessary thing like water and sanitation.
Yeah, well, shoot, I hate to hear that, but if that's true, I'd like to hear more of that. That's something that we should not support the concept of eliminating the cap.
And I just want to make sure that I understand, because I'd hate to see that kind of thing happen, where all of a sudden people who need water and sewage to survive in a decent way are now being charged, which is what's happened in places, a lot of places. It happened in Flint. That's a big part of the problem with Flint, Michigan. Their rates kept going up to where people who had no employment were paying $300 a month for their water alone.
Yeah.
Right? I just want to understand. I want to make sure that we're not pushing forward with something that is detrimental to our communities, but beneficial to our industry.
Well, I mean, I think that's a legitimate concern, but I don't think that PABs is really detrimental to solving that problem.
I mean, I just want to, it is important to note that they've lifted the cap on plenty of these other things in the past. And I think that's something that, honestly, especially considering how important Democrats have made Flint, Michigan to campaign issues in the past, I think that's something that they've likely already considered in bringing this bill forward. The Moving Forward Act is largely focused in other sections on things that the Democrats would argue are pro-community, pro-working class. A lot of the stuff in there is pro-green energy, and a lot of the stuff in there is aimed at helping low-income communities. So I would argue that this is likely something that they've considered and in their approach probably have safeguards against. Now, I would be very interested in speaking with some of the folks, the Democrats up in Michigan, and seeing what their position on this issue is, because as you said, they're going to have firsthand knowledge of this. But the fact that this is coming forward in a Democratic bill does take some of that concern away, I would argue. Just as I've said, this is a less a bill that they are intending to actually see become law in this Congress, and more a campaign statement. The Moving Forward Act is one of the bills that is seeing a lot of campaign touting. They're using this a lot in their advertising, their political messaging. This is supposed to be almost one of the components of the Green New Deal, that sort of thing. And there was a lot of progressive input coming into this, so I don't think they'd include a provision like this when it would be so easy to cut them off at the knees if that were necessarily the case.
Zach, I think the main point that we need to make is we support increased funding for EPA's state revolving funds, but we also support lifting the cap on PABs, because that really will be a main funding source if we can get that done.
May I say something? I have a question.
Of course. Please identify yourself.
Sure. This is Yvonne Bland with Cora, Maine. For the last few years, when we've been on the Hill, we've spoke in regards to lifting the cap on the PABs, and more often than not, the Democrat side of the hall seem to be in favor of that. and less on the other side of the hall with the Republicans. And so what we spoke to that really caught both of their attention and seemed to be somewhat amicable was the possibility of lifting the cap on the PABs for water infrastructure. So that lift on the cap would only be addressing water infrastructure, because basically the PABs, what has happened historically is the funding is there for infrastructure and other things, and emergencies come about, whether it be Mother Nature related or what have you, and they have to take funding and move it around and pull funding away from water infrastructure. So when we spoke to the point of the potential of lifting the caps on the PABs for water infrastructure specifically, both sides seem to be very open to that discussion. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Yvonne, you're exactly right. I know where that argument comes from, but it doesn't really, if we bought into that, it doesn't even come close to addressing the problem. So it's like, if we said, yeah, we're okay with lifting it to a certain level, it's not, then they get to say, oh, we dealt with wastewater, we did that, we did the PAB thing, and it allows them to say, hey, we dealt with this, stop bugging me about that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But the only way to get everybody off their line was to talk about a middle ground, and that's why we kind of, when we were discussing with them, that was somewhat of a middle ground, and that's kind of why. But I understand your point 100%, because it's just like with any of these bills, though. Hey, we've reauthorized this, or we refunded this, but half the doggone money didn't get used for what the purpose was for the bill. So I mean, that's government in general. If you go down that road.
I understand that. I understand that. I'm just saying, for you guys in your conversations today, it should be pretty clear we want to eliminate it. I mean.
I hear you.
All right. Well, with that, let's move on to the next briefing. We've only got about 10 minutes left, and we got a lot more to cover. So, Evan, if you want to take it for pipeline safety.
Okay, and I love the fact that we're having a conversation, and I think that's more important. I can just tell you on pipeline safety, we want to, for those of you that do gas distribution, the focus of pipeline safety has been on gas distribution for the first time in like 20 years. We want to embrace safety management systems, which is kind of the top to bottom approach to safety for gas. There's been a push to mandate SMS. I think we want to oppose that and embrace SMS. I think as contractors, all of us agree that with certain pillars of damage prevention, number one, there should be no exemptions to the process. We need accurate and timely locating of facilities, and contractors have to pothole, period. And that state enforcement entities have to enforce sure what that is, enforce damage prevention law. And the pipeline safety bill is really the only thing in play right now that might get done
by the end of the year. So that's kind of my point, Zach and Bob. Does that make sense?
Evan, it does. It certainly does.
Okay.
Let's move on to broadband deployment, just because we're coming up against the hour. And I know some people have meetings starting at 10 Eastern.
Okay. I'll be very... broadband deployment is a very big issue right now. I think we know as contractors deploying broadband that fiber is it. Fiber, fiber, fiber. And are you there, Bob?
Evan, you're cutting in and out.
Okay. I'm
that
sorry.
happens. We're all used to it in a way.
Okay. We know that fiber's it. We know that, that's what we know. 25 megahertz per second /3 is obsolete already. If anyone's going to figure it out, it would be Google, 3 years ago. So we should be pushing for 100 up, 100 down, and that will provide future-proof service, and that we need some more oversight to make sure that carriers aren't trying to patch over copper systems or satellite systems or stuff that undermine the fact that carriers have to pay what they need to pay. And I would say that we have briefings on the website.
Evan, you're cutting in and out. Zach, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm happy to talk about it. So
you just have a better line than Evan does.
Yeah, no problem. So Evan already mentioned the importance of fiber optic systems when it comes to broadband. Right now, especially when we're in an era where everything is important, everything is carried out virtually, it's very important that we're relying on modern technology and not old, outdated standards. 25.3 is the current FCC standard for federal funding. That is obsolete, to say the least. And while we all know at this point, if we're streaming video and the like, 25 is a little dicey, especially if you have multiple devices on the same network. But now more than ever, it's really important to focus on that second number, that upload speed. What we are doing right now would be absolutely impossible if 3 Mbps was the standard across the board. You just simply cannot stream video at a speed that low, not reliably, not with a decent connection. And like Jake Jones just mentioned in the chat, this is a perfect example of why our need is so strong for a better broadband infrastructure. So that 100-100 standard that NUCA supports ensures reliability. And to an extent, it's future-proof. Once you have a system in the ground that can maintain that speed, you can determine a higher speed through your system largely by changing out end-to-end technology and not actually touching anything that's already in the ground. So we're supporting future-proof technology like fiber optic. And one thing that we are a little concerned about is a reliance on unproven technology for federal dollars. A lot of us have heard a lot of things about a certain high-tech company that's trying to do satellite broadband, and that's great, and best of luck to them. But when it comes to using federal dollars, the federal government should not be subsidizing the deployment of that system to the detriment of proven technology that can go in the ground right away and provide a high level of service. So we are strongly supporting the use of fiber optic over copper or other systems. And we're also strongly supporting a variety of funding reforms that would ensure that the amount of dollars that are necessary to get this stuff in the ground as fast as possible is there. One of the key elements of that is reform to the Universal Service Fund. We're looking to move from universal service to universal broadband, which means not only a high level of speed across the board, but also expanding the base of the contributions to that universal service fund. Legislation should include requirements for wireless and broadband carriers to start contributing into that USF, whereas now there's a lot of folks who don't. And lastly, we need oversight. We need the federal government, the FCC, and Congress to do their job and make sure that folks aren't taking that money and just using it to patch over old copper wire or not actually do the work and get that broadband deployed to rural areas, because in the past that's been a real problem. So are there any questions on pipeline or on broadband? I see in the chat there is a question regarding the pipeline safety. The House bill, we don't have that right now. In the Senate, there is unless Evan, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we have that right now. In the Senate, however, there is the Pipes Act, S2299. Don't worry, I'll put that in the chat. That was a bipartisan bill passed back in August. We do support that. There are a couple provisions regarding stronger state enforcement that we haven't seen in there, but which we are supporting in the House side and trying to get introduced. But that
Zach,
is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, we support that, but we would support language that would be proposed to enhance state enforcement of state damage prevention law.
Anyway, if there are no questions on broadband, let's move to the closing.
Well, thank you, Evan and Zach, and Bob. Are there any other just general questions that from the audience? You can also unmute yourself. We are at 10 o'clock, and we kind of was hoping to be done by then because I know there are some 10 o'clock meetings.
There is one quick one. Should we push for mandatory instant reporting through every state's one call systems or enforcement processes? Should we push for mandatory incident reporting through the states?
States.
Zach or Evan?
Can you hear me? States.
This is Brenda. That was my question. So when we're pushing for enforcement through the Pipes Act, are you pushing for mandatory reporting? So every time there's a mismarked, an unmarked line or a hit, it's mandatory that everybody report. That's what we're doing in Pennsylvania. And it's changing the numbers. The data is looking very good for contractors.
I would say, Brenda, federal and state. I know you're doing that statewide, but yeah, that's what we're looking for federally.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Brenda, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we're looking for a federal law that would increase, kind of up the ante on all this stuff.
Okay. Well, I guess that kind of wraps up our opening session of today's virtual summit. We thank our congressional speakers and we thank everybody for participating virtually. We had a couple of hiccups, but we got through them. Again, this recording will be posted on our website as well as all the other information, the leave behinds, the other videos, the chairman's welcome video at WeDigAmerica.org. You can also go to NUCA.com/summit. The same information is there. But you can also, throughout the day, as you're in your meetings and you have other questions, Evan's mobile number is on here. You can also call the NUCA office. You can also shoot myself an email. Just reach out to us with any questions. We hope you have a great day on the Hill. And again, reminder to be back here at 5 o'clock today, if you so wish, with your favorite beverage, and just talk about your day and the pros and cons and what you're hearing back from our legislators. So you can use that exact same link. So thank you, everybody, for participating. And if we were in person, I would also make sure you recruit just one member for NUCA, so we double our size. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.